A deal was signed, the guns for the most part went quiet, and the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical shipping lanes on the planet, reopened to commercial traffic for the first time in months. But there is one problem. Israel is still in Lebanon. Its troops control a wide section of southern Lebanese territory, beyond the Litani River, beyond the line Israel itself declared as its own security boundary. Tens of thousands of Lebanese residents remain displaced. The Lebanese army is trying to move in. Israel has said, not yet. And Iran, the other signatory to the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, has stated clearly and publicly that this situation is a violation of the deal. That is where we are on June 16, 2026. This video covers 3 questions: why Israel will not leave, what Iran is actually threatening, and what the next 60 days look like, because the clock on this deal is already running. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran. The targets were not random. They hit Iranian nuclear facilities, military command infrastructure, and at the top of that target list, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. He was killed. Iran responded with missile and drone strikes across the region, targeting U.S. embassies, military installations, and oil infrastructure in the Strait of Hormuz. The war was on. Global shipping rerouted. Flights were canceled across the Middle East. Oil markets convulsed. The kind of disruption that economists had warned about for years happened almost overnight. March 16th, Israel invades Lebanon. Map showing IDF ground advance into southern Lebanon along multiple axes. On March 16th, Israeli ground forces crossed into Lebanon. This was not a surprise. Hezbollah had resumed rocket strikes on Israel on March 2nd, following Khamenei's assassination. The Israeli Air Force had already been hitting targets across Lebanon, including Beirut. The invasion pushed deep. By the time any ceasefire conversation became serious, Israeli troops had moved beyond the Litani River, the line that had historically marked the outer boundary of Israel's declared security zone in Lebanon. That border matters. The Litani River is not just a geographic feature, it is a political red line going back decades. Israeli forces being north of it means they are in territory that no agreement, no UN resolution, no ceasefire framework has ever sanctioned as an Israeli military presence. April 7th to 8th, first ceasefire and immediate breach. After 5 weeks of fighting, the US and Iran agreed to a ceasefire on April 7th and 8th. It was supposed to include Lebanon. Within hours, the IDF launched a blitz across the country that killed hundreds and wounded more than 1,000 people. The ceasefire was supposed to hold. It barely started before it was tested. The United States then pushed Israel to reduce the temperature. On April 16th, Trump announced a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. But Hezbollah rejected the terms. The fighting in Lebanon continued. April 13th, the naval blockade. After the first round of peace talks in Pakistan collapsed, talks that lasted 21 hours and ended with no agreement, Trump imposed a naval blockade on Iran. The U.S. redirected 129 commercial vessels attempting to leave or enter Iranian ports. 6 ships were disabled to ensure compliance. The Strait of Hormuz became the economic pressure point of the entire conflict. June 8th, Trump stops Israel from striking Tehran. By early June, the war had entered its most dangerous phase. Israel was preparing a significant strike on Tehran itself. Trump placed a phone call to Netanyahu and told him to hold off. A second call followed within hours. Trump warned Netanyahu directly, "Keep striking Iran and you will isolate yourself." Netanyahu pulled back on Iran, but he made clear that Lebanon was different. Attacks in Lebanon would continue. June 14th, the Islamabad MOU. On June 12th, the US and Iran reached a final agreed text. On June 14th, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the deal was done. On June 15th, Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed it had been signed digitally the night before. The memorandum reopens the Strait of Hormuz. It ends the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports. It extends the ceasefire by 60 days. And it is, in the words of those who brokered it, a framework agreement, meaning the hardest issues are not resolved. Iran's nuclear program, uranium stockpiles, sanctions relief, none of it is in the text. And Lebanon is where it gets complicated. On June 16th, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi stood in front of foreign diplomats and ambassadors in Tehran and delivered a statement that left no room for ambiguity. He said, "Any military attack by Israel against Lebanon from that point forward, and any continued occupation of Lebanese territory, would be regarded as a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding." He went further. He identified the 2 parties to the MOU as the United States and Israel on one side, and Iran and Hezbollah on the other. That framing is significant. It means Iran considers Hezbollah a co-beneficiary of the deal's protections, not a separate actor that Israel can continue to target independently of the US-Iran framework. And then he said this: "The end of war in Lebanon, including Israeli withdrawal from occupied Lebanese territory, is an inseparable part of the complete end of the conflict. Without it, the war cannot be considered fully concluded." That is Iran's red line, stated clearly, on record, to the diplomatic community. Israel's position, also stated clearly. On June 16th, Netanyahu's response was equally direct. Israeli troops will not withdraw from the areas they have seized in Lebanon, Syria, or the Gaza Strip. Israel will continue to target what it calls Iran's terror arms, and Israel will, in Netanyahu's words, need to continue to stand guard against Iran. Israeli officials added that they do not plan to pull troops out of southern Lebanon. The IDF presence north of the Litani River is, as far as Jerusalem is concerned, a security necessity, not a ceasefire violation. And then came the statement that cut through all the diplomatic language. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Ben-Gvir said on Monday, "Trump's agreement does not bind us." 4 words. They encapsulate exactly where the Israeli government's hardline bloc stands. The structural problem, 2 incompatible interpretations of one agreement. Split-screen graphic, Iran's interpretation versus Israel's interpretation of the MOU. Here is the core of the problem. The Islamabad MOU is a framework agreement with secret terms. Its exact text has not been made public. That ambiguity is not accidental. It allowed both sides to sign something they could interpret in their favor. Iran read the agreement as covering Lebanon and the cessation of all Israeli military operations on all fronts. Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif said exactly that in his announcement. Both sides have declared the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. Israel did not sign that version, or at least Israel does not accept that interpretation. Netanyahu said Israel halted attacks on Iran. Full stop. Lebanon is a separate theater, and Israel's position is that its operations there are not governed by a US-Iran framework. The US has not resolved this contradiction. Trump, at the G7 in Evian, France, said he believes the deal can survive even if Israel continues attacking Lebanon. He called the Israel-Hezbollah conflict a minor war. He called Hezbollah a pinprick. Iran does not share that assessment. Reason 1. Military gains. Israel has no intention of walking away from Israel's ground presence north of the Litani River took months and significant losses to establish. The IDF controls terrain that provides early warning capability, fire suppression zones, and depth against Hezbollah rocket and anti-tank systems. Walking away from that ground means Hezbollah eventually reoccupies it. Israel's military doctrine does not permit that outcome. Reason 2. The internal coalition Ben-Gvir's statement, "Trump's agreement does not bind us," is not a lone voice. It reflects the position of Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and a significant bloc within Netanyahu's governing coalition. Netanyahu cannot afford to lose that bloc without losing his government. The coalition arithmetic forces his hand. Both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich publicly reacted to the US-Iran agreement with hostility. They have been consistent throughout this conflict. Any deal that constrains Israel's freedom of military action is unacceptable. Reason 3. Lebanon is not Iran. Israel's restraint toward Iran, particularly the decision to halt strikes on Tehran after Trump's intervention, was explicitly framed by Netanyahu as a concession made to the United States. Lebanon was explicitly excluded from that restraint. Netanyahu has maintained since early in the conflict that Hezbollah and Israel are in a separate, ongoing fight that predates the 2026 war and continues regardless of what Washington and Tehran agree to. Reason 4. The nuclear question remains open. Iran's nuclear program was not addressed in the MOU. Israel's fundamental strategic concern, preventing Iran from reaching nuclear weapons capability, has not been resolved. Withdrawing from Lebanese territory while that question remains open would, in Israel's strategic calculus, remove leverage without gaining anything of substance. Netanyahu's phrase, "We will need to continue to stand guard against Iran," is not posturing. It reflects a doctrinal position. The threat has not been eliminated, so Israeli military posture cannot be fully drawn down. Trump's language on June 16th is worth examining carefully because it reveals a genuine fracture between Washington and Jerusalem, the kind that does not often surface in public. Trump said Netanyahu has to be more responsible in Lebanon. He said he was not happy with Israel's recent strike on an apartment building in Beirut. He called the Israel-Hezbollah conflict a minor war. He was standing at the G7 summit in France on camera in front of the international press, and he was criticizing his closest regional ally. That is not nothing. Trump has intervened twice to stop Israeli escalation. He warned Netanyahu he would isolate himself. He was reportedly enraged by the Beirut strike that threatened to collapse the Iran negotiations in their final hours. According to reporting by CNN, Trump conveyed that fury using expletives in a call with Netanyahu. But Trump also said he believes the deal can survive even if Israel continues striking Lebanon. That is the contradiction at the center of US policy right now. Washington brokered a framework that Iran is interpreting as covering Lebanon. Washington is simultaneously telling Israel it can keep operating in Lebanon. Those two positions are not compatible. VP Vance, for his part, pushed back on claims that Iran would receive billions in unfrozen assets as part of the the deal. No sanctions relief, no asset transfers. The deal is military, not economic. That matters for Iran's internal calculus. Tehran signed a framework that stops the bombs from falling, reopens the strait, ends the blockade, but delivers no economic relief. The population that has absorbed over 3,400 dead and 26,500 wounded is waiting for something tangible. And so far, the MOU does not deliver that. The Geneva signing, June 20th. The MOU is set to be formally signed in Geneva. The framework gives both sides 60 days to negotiate the major outstanding issues: Iran's nuclear program, uranium stockpiles, ballistic missiles, proxy forces, and sanctions relief. These are not peripheral questions. They are the entire substance of the conflict. The 2025 12-day war ceasefire lasted until February 2026. That truce collapsed when the underlying issues were left unresolved. The Islamabad framework is structurally similar. It pauses the violence without addressing the causes. Scenario 1. The Lebanon crisis triggers a collapse. The most immediate threat to the deal is the Lebanon question. Iran has stated publicly that continued Israeli occupation of Lebanese territory constitutes a violation. Israel has stated publicly that it will not leave. If Iran concludes that the U.S. cannot or will not enforce the terms of its own agreement, Tehran has every incentive to walk away from the framework before the 60 days expire. The trigger would likely be an Israeli military action in Lebanon that Iran judges as sufficiently provocative: a senior Hezbollah figure assassinated, a large strike on civilian infrastructure, or IDF expansion of its occupation zone. Scenario 2. The 60 days expire without a deal. The more likely scenario is that the 60-day negotiation window runs out without agreement on the core issues. Iran's nuclear program is a question that has defied resolution for more than 2 decades. Doing it in 60 days, with the framework terms secret, with Israel not directly at the table, and with the US-Iran relationship at historic lows, that is an extraordinary task. If the window expires without a deal, both sides return to a legal state of no agreement. The U.S. would face a decision: reimpose the naval blockade, resume strikes, or accept a prolonged stalemate. Scenario 3. The deal holds, but Lebanon simmers. The third possibility is that the framework survives its 60 days in a degraded form. U.S.-Iran tensions remain below the threshold of direct military action. Lebanon stays a hot conflict, but is insulated from the broader war framework. Israel maintains its occupation. Iran voices objections but does not pull the trigger on resuming strikes. This is the most politically convenient outcome for Washington. It is also the most unstable. A ceasefire that everyone is violating in practice, but no one is willing to formally declare dead, is not a ceasefire. It is a countdown. The Lebanese civilians in the middle of it. While governments negotiate frameworks with secret terms, the people of southern Lebanon are driving back to homes they do not know are still standing. Lebanese authorities told residents not to rush back. They came anyway. The roads south of Beirut were packed on June 15th. These are people who have been displaced for 3.5 months. They are returning not because the situation is safe, but because there is nowhere else to go and nothing left to wait for. Israeli troops are still in their villages. The Litani River crossings are monitored. The Lebanese army is deploying, but it has no authority to move Israeli forces out. If this agreement collapses, those people are the ones who pay the price again. The Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding is real. The signatures are real. The Strait of Hormuz has reopened. The blockade is lifted. The direct exchange of fire between the United States and Iran has, for now, stopped. But a deal that stops the bombs falling is not the same as a deal that resolves why they started falling. The nuclear question is unresolved. Sanctions are unchanged. And Israel is sitting in southern Lebanon with no intention of moving. Iran has said that is a violation. Israel has said the deal does not bind it. The United States has said the deal can survive anyway. All three of those positions cannot simultaneously be true. The 60-day clock runs to approximately mid-August. By then, either the outstanding issues are resolved, which would be a diplomatic achievement with few modern parallels, or the framework phrase, the pressure rebuilds, and the region faces another decision point. The question is not whether this is over. The question is how long this pause lasts, and what breaks it.